Hey guys, it's Kevin again. So, obviously, you've seen the title, you know what this video is going to be. This is, of course, a review for Season 1 of Agatha All Along, but it might not necessarily be in the way you expected to, and let me just explain it in the best way I can. I originally intended to do Agatha All Along as a weekly review. I was going to talk about the first 3 episodes, and then from there I was going to review the show weekly, and unfortunately that didn't really end up panning out like a lot of things this year when it comes to individual episode reviews that aren't reality shows, because apparently that's the only thing I can keep up with. I was not able to stay consistent with my reviews, so, I kind of was just unsure what to do because I had already filmed my reviews for the first 3 episodes, and I didn't want to just have to redo it again because I actually really liked the way that video turned out. I think I did a good job explaining everything. I think I did a good job of laying out the breadcrumbs that they had planted at that point, what I thought they were doing well, some things I was concerned about, and then was prepared to just kind of move forward and, like I said, talk about the show on a weekly basis. And obviously that didn't end up coming to fruition. But it doesn't change the fact that, I did do that video, and I don't want to pretend that, it, didn't happen, because I really like the way it turned out. So ultimately, what I decided to do is kind of do something a little bit different and divide this video up into 2 chunks, essentially. The first half of this video is that video that I filmed, talking about episodes 1 to 3. It's might be edited a little bit strange because, again, it's supposed to be its own individual video, and, for a while, like I said, what I was going to do initially was, 2 videos, one of that episodes 1 to 3, the other talking about episodes 4 through 8, but I just figured, this season has been done for a while now. It doesn't really make sense to do 2 videos when I can just kind of combine them into one, so that's essentially what we are going to do here. The second half of this video will be the other episodes of the show that I have to cover. It's going to be a lot more like the episodes 1 to 3 review. I'm going to go into spoilers. I'm going to talk about everything that happens, how I felt about how they wrapped everything up. It's not going to be me reviewing each episode individually. It's going to be a much more a summarization of those episodes, because that's kind of what I did in episodes 1 to 3, and I kind of want to continue to do that here. So again, just figured that I should put this at the beginning of the video so you're not super confused by what's going on when, why the video is structured in the way that it is. Just figured that it would, make the most sense to divide it this way. And also, again, I have a plethora of videos that I'm trying to get done before the end of the year, and I just felt like this was the easiest way to go about it, to make it as easy as possible to upload this video, but also make sure that you get the most merit out of this video. Again, it doesn't make sense for me to upload episodes 1 to 3 when the rest of the season has already happened and I'm acting like it hasn't. So I think it just makes sense to go about it this way. But either way, I'm going to stop rambling. Let's just go ahead and enjoy the rest of the review. So, with that said, I'm now going to transition to months ago. This was literally the end of September, maybe the beginning of October, something around that time. Whenever episode 3 had come out, we were heading into, episode 4. That's when this video was filmed, so we're gonna go ahead and cut to that video. And this show, it takes place about 3 years after the events of WandaVision, and if you remember, in that show, Agatha Harkness was placed under this spell that has seemingly, trapped her in Westview permanently. She thinks that she's Agnes, and she's developed this whole new life, and eventually she is broken out of this spell by this character known as Teen, known simply just as Teen, and when she comes out, she realizes that though she remembers who she is, she doesn't have any powers, and she has been completely stripped of all of her magical powers, and so now she has to try to find a way to regain them, and she thinks her way of doing that might be having to face this very long and treacherous journey known as the Witch's Road, and so she assembles a coven of witches in an attempt to go on this journey, and in order to do that, she needs to assemble a coven of witches to accompany her alongside this journey. And I was really excited for this show, to be honest with you. I mean, yes, look, I'll say right off the bat, yes, a lot of MCU Disney Plus shows have been relatively hit or miss. I think that the MCU in general is not on the level that it used to be. A lot of the time these days, it's either you're going to get something that's really great, or you're going to get something, most of the time you're going to get something that's kind of solid, but then more than often, you also get something that feels very half-assed and just doesn't really feel like they put a lot of effort into it, and This show, I didn't really know how to feel about it. I mean, I loved WandaVision, as most people did, and I thought the character of Agatha is probably one of the better villains we've had in Phase 4, a lot of that due to just how great Kathryn Hahn was in the role, but I thought that there was potential with that character, and it really wasn't a shock to me when they announced that she was going to get her own spin-off series, and unlike most people, I actually thought, okay, there's a lot that you can do here. You know, the penultimate episode of WandaVision kind of showed us a little bit of her backstory, and this could kind of dive further into that. You know, we can kind of get more into the Coven and what kind of got her to this point, and I was just excited to see what the show was going to be. But then the marketing was just really confusing to me. The title kept changing, and which really made me start to believe that they just didn't have a vision for this show. If they kept changing the title constantly, it kept getting pushed back. But then they basically said that it was all part of the marketing, like it was always called Agatha All Along, but like Agatha was changing the title, and I was like, I don't know if I fully buy that. Then the trailers came out, and that's really when I started to feel a little bit more confident on the show. It seemed to have a little bit more of a vision, going in more of this like horror type direction, and that started to give me a little bit more confidence that maybe this might actually turn out to be something pretty good. And so I think the more the marketing rolled on, the more excited I did actually start to become. It was a project I was kind of dubious in at first, but it did feel like as we got closer, I started to feel just a little bit more, I just started to have a little bit more faith in it as a project overall. And what I will say from this first 3 episodes is that, yeah, I actually am really digging this show so far. Now, it's not perfect. There definitely are things that do bring it down, but I think compared to other MCU Disney Plus shows, I mean, this is easily one of the strongest starts I think that we've had. I think if they're able, I really hope is able to keep up what it's doing, because I honestly am liking it a lot more than I expected to, but we're just going to jump into it right now. Now, since we're talking about the first 3 episodes, and I don't want this video to be like an hour long, I'm not really going to go through, here's what happens episode 1, here's what happens episode 2, here's what happens episode 3, just because in the grand scheme of things, if we really have to talk about this show, there's not a lot that happens over the course of these first 3 episodes. Episode 3 definitely gives us like a better idea. There's a little bit more to talk about, but as of right now, a lot of this has been set up so far. And what I will say to that is, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think a huge issue the majority of these shows have had is that they just don't feel very well structured. They don't really feel like they had a set goal of, okay, how are we going to get these characters from point A to point B? It felt like it was like a little bit of exposition in the first couple episodes, and then you get to like episode 4, and then it's just all gas, no brakes, and it never feels like it feels earned, and it never feels earned. It never feels like they've built up the story enough to get us to this point. So I think the fact that they are mostly taking their time with this so far, I do think is actually really good, and I like what we are seeing from the show. So I think the best way to do this is I'm going to talk about the things I liked and then the things that I didn't like, and we're kind of just going to go from there. So things I liked right off the bat are all the performances. I think everyone in this show is absolutely fantastic. I think the cast is easily one of the best elements of this entire show, and I think if they weren't all on their A game, the show just wouldn't be as successful. When it comes to Kathryn Hahn, I mean, look, we already know that she is a really talented comedic actress, but we also know how great she is in this role, and she really does take it to new heights here. I mean, this is an Agatha that is so determined to get out of this situation and will really do whatever it takes. She's just as ruthless, she's just as conniving, but she also feels a little bit more, stripped back, and as a result, she kind of isn't able to be as powerful as we saw her in WandaVision, and I definitely do really like that, and I think that Hahn is playing into that very well. While right now, yes, we haven't seen a ton of layers of this character, I do think Hahn is just really leaning into that more evil, maniacal side, but also kind of giving us more of a sense of where Agatha is at this point in her life and what her ultimate goal is, and I think that she's doing a really great job, and I think that, she alone really does anchor the series. But I also gotta highlight Joe Locke, who I think is fantastic as Teen, who, the character himself we'll talk about in a little bit, but I think that his dynamic with Kathryn Hahn is just so on point in this show. The rapport between these two is excellent. I think the two of them work so well together. It is so easy to buy into their relationship throughout this show. I think a huge, part of this show really is, feeling that chemistry between the two of them and caring about their whole dynamic. And I really do. And it's again because I think both of them are just having so much fun here. And Locke is not an actor I'm overly familiar with. I haven't gotten a chance to watch like Heartstopper and things like that. I know a lot of people love that show, and I know that he's, from what I heard, really great on that show. But this makes me really want to do that because I think he's just really great in this role, and I really just love the charisma he's bringing to the table. I think he does a really good job at playing this kind of awkward, like nerdy teen, but also somebody who is generally cares about this mission and wants to see it through, and I think that he's doing a really good job. But I think honestly, and I'm sure most people are going to agree with me, even though she's only been in one episode, Aubrey Plaza nearly steals the show so far. I think she is just so well cast as this character of Rio. She's mostly shrouded in mystery, even more so than the teen. There's a lot we don't know about her other than there's a lot of tension between her and Agatha, and I'll get into that a little bit more. But I think this is just the kind of role that she just excels in. She really sinks her teeth into playing this character that seems very vengeful, but also seems like she's she has her own goal of sorts, and I think is just so great in this role. She's someone that you just feel so drawn to, and again, despite the fact that she has had limited screen time up to this point, I think she has just done such an amazing job in this show so far, and I can't wait to see more of her character. And so I think those are the performances that really do stick out to me. The other performances in this show are really good. I like Patti LuPone and Shashir Zamata and Ali On, and Deborah Jo Rupp is Deborah Jo Rupp. She's very funny and frequently had a lot of lines that did make me laugh, but I don't really feel like we've seen the full potential of them as actors yet. I feel like, we're still starting things off, and I think they're all really fun, but I don't feel like we've seen enough of them so far. Shazir Zamata is probably the one that's had the most substance. I think that she's had some really strong moments so far, whether it be comedically, but also just in terms of her delivery. There's a conversation she has with the teen in episode 3 that I thought was really strong, and I really do enjoy, her presence throughout the show. Patti LuPone always is giving like really big showy performances, and this is really no different. They're definitely leaning into like the campy aspects of the show, and I think they're doing a good job with that. But overall, like I said, I think the cast is just really strong here and definitely one of the most consistent elements of this show. However, the thing that impresses me the most, 3 episodes into this show, really is the directing throughout it. And I think this has been a big problem in the majority of MCU Disney Plus shows, is that a lot of them just haven't felt like they had a clear vision. Like maybe they started off having a vision, and then halfway through, it's like Marvel came in and said, no, we don't like this. You're, not getting to the points quicker enough, and we need to kind of, put this in a more like sort of generic, familiar direction and kind of strip it back of, what we're used to. And what I will say about the show so far is that this is easily one of the most distinct and unique visions we have seen to any of these shows so far. And a lot of that is due to the fact that this is the first MCU Disney Plus show to actually have a showrunner. Jack Schaefer, who, did all the, directing for WandaVision, has basically taken the reins. And I think that was a fantastic decision because it's clear she knows what she wants the show to be. Yes, it does have some similar vibes to WandaVision. The first episode is literally a parody of like True Detective or Mayor of Easttown, but it quickly has settled into finding a groove of its own. And I think 3 episodes in, it already does have a distinctive style. It is very fun, and it can be very zany in that way. And a lot of it is a lot of just, seeing these women go back and forth, but it also has this tinge of horror to it. And I think when it leans into that, it actually does work out really well. Particularly in the second episode, I think the scene with the teen and him, getting accosted by the Salem 7 and trying to evade them. I thought that was one of the strongest moments of the show so far. Or episode 3, where there is that moment where they're drinking this potion and it's doing weird stuff to all their faces. Yes, it was funny, but again, I like that the show is leaning into those horror sensibilities, and I think it's doing a really good job with that. But the comedy also lands very well in the show. I mean, I was laughing frequently throughout these first 3 episodes. I think there's some really funny moments going on here, and just some really great one-liners. So again, I like that Schafer is trying to do something different here. It feels very refreshing in that way, because it doesn't really feel like an MCU show. And I've said it before, I think the best MCU shows are the ones that have tried to kind of stand out on their own. I think Loki did an amazing job with that in the first 2 seasons, or the only 2 seasons, having a clear vision and sticking by it the entire way through. Yes, it tied, but while still tying into the greater universe, it still felt like it had this much more like grander scope to it that a lot of the shows just simply didn't. A lot of the more sort of very introspective questions that was wrestling with. I think that show did a great job with it. Moon Knight, I will also throw in there. Yes, the ending kind of messed that up, but a lot of it was very deliberate, very psychological, and I thought they did a really good job with that. And then even something like a Miss Marvel, I thought had this, really sort of more YA type feel to it, and I think, leaned into that very well. And so I think this show has just done a really good job. It doesn't feel generic. It does actually feel pretty refreshing, and I think the directing here is easily one of the strongest elements, but also the structure of the show. I think the fact that, again, we have a showrunner on here, this is one of the first MCU Disney Plus shows that feels like a TV show. And yes, that does kind of feel like, okay, we're doing the bare minimum. It feels like a TV show. Whatever. Why does that matter? Because one of the biggest criticisms that most of these shows have had is that they just feel like elongated movies. And I wouldn't say that's the case for all of them. I think a good majority of them, I actually do feel like have done a good job of standing out on their own. Something like a Loki, something like a WandaVision certainly did a good job with that. I would say the first few episodes of Miss Marvel did a good job with that. But if we're talking about something like Falcon and Winter Soldier, or even Moon Knight, I would say, or especially Secret Invasion, very much did feel like they were just longer movies and didn't really feel like they had a plot of their own from episode to episode. And so it kind of just felt like we were just, interrupting a scene from a movie, and then a week later we go back to that movie. It kind of felt that way. This show so far does not feel like that at all. This is one of the most truest examples of an actual TV show, and I think they're doing a tremendous job with that. I mean, just from these first 3 episodes, each episode has had a goal of their own. There's been an actual, story going on that we wrap up in that episode, and then, but still feeling like a larger piece of the puzzle, still having this interconnected story, and I feel like that's the way to go about it. I think the show has done a really good job when it comes to all of that, and I think that is just really great. So yeah, I think the structure of the show is great. The utilization of practical effects, I'm also just really impressed by so far. This is one of the cheapest MCU shows we've gotten, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I think the fact that they haven't put so much emphasis into these visual effects, it really does tell me that they are trying to, put a lot more effort into this show and make it as high quality as possible. And I think the fact that they are utilizing more practical effects, I think actually are doing the show a lot of good. And I'm definitely very impressed by that. I think Marvel has had a lot of criticisms lately for like overutilization of CGI. And I definitely do think a lot of that is very valid. A lot of it has looked really weird and off-putting, and what I like about this show is that you can tell they are in these locations. The makeup, for example, that the best example is episode 3 when those things are happening to their face. That was all makeup. There's photos out there and videos of them, having just like, just kind of messing around with it. And I think that's all really great. I like the fact that they are actually putting a lot more effort into this stuff. And I think that definitely is doing a lot of wonders for this show. The production design and costumes of the show are also really great here. I like the different aesthetics that we have going on. And I also like that in all 3 episodes, episodes, you know, there's been different styles to the show. Episode 1, like I said, being this more, you know, having this more like muted color palette and really feeling like this was something that you would have seen on like HBO or something like that. And episode 2 feeling like it's leaning more into what the show is going to be. It's a little bit more playful. It's a little bit more silly. I think they did a good job with that. And then episode 3 basically being this sort of, you know, leaning into this idea of like middle-aged moms and like wine parties and things like that, and having that sort of aesthetic. I think all of that is really cool, and it's a way to keep the show fresh and exciting and not make every episode feel like it's the same thing. It does make each episode stand out and feel like it can be its own little entry, and I think that's exactly the way to go when it comes to these shows. And then, of course, the musical number in episode 2, I mean, that's exactly the kind of thing that I get excited about, and I really like the way the show is leaning into that. They didn't try to half-ass it. It was this full-on, you know, montage where all of them are singing this song, and, you know, they're trying to do it under one unified goal. I like the idea that even after that, they didn't feel like it was as good as it used to be. I thought that was a really funny idea, but then also, again, it's a really catchy song. It's one that really does stick with you, and, I mean, that's really the power of having, you know, Robert Lopez and Kristen Anderson Lopez, you know, behind it. I mean, they never really miss. Even Frozen 2, a movie I don't really like, they still provided some really great songs, and this is just another great example. I love that they got them back from WandaVision. They have most of the same team back from WandaVision, which I think is really good. So you are able to maintain some of the things that show did well, but also give it this more like dark and sort of an ominous feeling that we just haven't really seen before. So I think, again, that was another really big highlight of the show. Everyone's really talked about the song, and I feel like there isn't much more that I can say that other reviewers haven't, but I just think that it was definitely one of the big highlights of this first 3 episodes, and I definitely really do enjoy it. I hope this isn't the last we get. I like what we've been getting with the musical number so far. Even episode 1, the way that they did like a, grittier opening credits, but still have it be the same song, I think is really clever the way they're doing that. The different variations they're doing of the song. I don't know if we're going to get any more of that, but I think it's really cool the way they're playing into that, and I think that was something that worked really well throughout these first 3 episodes. I'm going to get more into spoilers, though, here. So if you haven't seen these first 3 episodes, now is the time I'm going to dive more into just what I liked about these first 3 episodes on a spoiler level and where I think the show is really going. So we're just going to jump right into it. First thing I want to talk about is in episode 1. I really did not expect for the show to start off in the way that it did, with her being in this, like, True Detective, Mare of Easttown style hex. I thought that it was going to be one of those things where, like, Agnes has been there, she's like developed her own life, and she's now become this police detective, but no, it's that basically it's still like, even though Wanda no longer is there, the show, Westview is still operating under the same sort of, false sort of reality that everything's a TV show, and now it's turned into Mare of Easttown, and I really do like the way they leaned into that. I will say, I do think that I would have liked to see a little bit more of a utilization of it, but the idea that there's this investigation going on, and she's not really sure what it's all connected to, but then you have Rio, who it seemed like was aware, but like just didn't feel like it was the right time to tell her, and then eventually being able to once Wanda has died, I think was a pretty solid setup. But what I will say is I think Disney made the right decision in not releasing the first episode on its own instead of releasing the first 2, because there's just not a lot to glean from that first episode. We do get a sense of like the connection between Rio and Agatha. They potentially were lovers, and you can see that there's a lot of tension there where, there's some sort of incident that went down, and the two of them just really, you can see that they're, Agatha's trying to distance from her. Rio, I think, is trying to pull her back in, warning her of the Salem 7 and things like that. And I thought that this was a pretty solid setup. There's a lot of things that the show does do very well in terms of, setting up this intriguing mystery. But at this point, I still didn't really know where the show was going. Once we got to episode 2, I think the show did a better job of giving us a better sense of just the focus here. I think they did a good job with that. But the other mystery I think they set up really well here in these first 2 episodes is with the teen, who I think they're already doing such a great job of just laying out that groundwork for this character. There's so much mystery surrounding him. The fact that someone has put this, we find out, at first I thought it was going to be that he just couldn't tell Agatha his past, and anytime he brings it up, he is silenced or muted. You know, if she's asking, he can't say his name, he can't say anything about his backstory. I thought this was only going to be the case for Agatha, but then we find out in episode 3 that it's like a full-on sigil that's been placed on him that has like blocked him from telling any of the witches about his you know, his past. And I think that's a really interesting idea, and I'm really excited to see where that's going to go. And then you have in episode 3 this whole idea that, and you know, a lot of people immediately thought that, oh, this is Wanda's kid, you know, that's why we're going in this direction. They already revealed that this is Billy, and, you know, the show for some reason is hiding that. I don't know if it's going to be that simple. I think that there honestly is a lot more going on here, and the fact that in 3 episodes, they already are kind of telling us what's happening. I just feel like there's 9 episodes of this show. I don't think it's going to be that simple. I think there's going to be more to this, and at least I'm hoping that it goes in a really surprising direction, and this isn't like one of those subversions, like, for example, like a Ralph Boner or something like that. I hope it doesn't go in that direction. You know, I hope that it actually goes in a direction that works for this show, because I really like the intrigue they're setting up for that character. And then even more so in episode 3, when, you know, he's talked to by Jen, who kind of tells him that, like, hey, you know, you can't really trust Agatha. Agatha's someone who's, like, really powerful, and, you know, she herself ended up sacrificing her kid, and there's a possibility that he might actually be her kid. I do think is a really interesting idea, and I think that there's a lot of potential setup there that I'm really intrigued by what they're doing with this character. I think what I like so far is that every episode they've given us a little bit more of a piece of him. Episode 1 kind of just setting him up as someone who's just kind of thrown in this situation, but then you learn in episode 2 that he's actually this like huge fan of Agatha. He's been like endlessly studying all the witches, and he wants to be a part of all of this, even though he really shouldn't be. And then episode 3, you kind of find out that he might potentially be her son. Again, I feel like there's a larger purpose for the teen, and I really like the way the show is just slowly laying out all the groundwork for this character, because the more they do, the more intrigued I really do become as to what's really going on with him. I also really do like how much character we're getting in the show so far. I think a big issue for me in a majority of these Disney Plus shows, and it's one that I don't hear enough people talk about, is just how disposable the majority of most of the secondary characters in these shows are. A lot of the time they will set up potential, you know, plot lines for these characters, and then, well, we only have 6 episodes and they don't really end up going much of anywhere. I think, for example, of like, say, you know, Miss Marvel and her friends. You know, I think that they set up some intriguing storylines there, and they just didn't really go much of anywhere with them until the end, because they only had 6 episodes and they weren't really able to do that. Or I think of something like a Moon Knight, for example. You had some potential ideas for characters and they didn't really go in that direction. I think Falcon and the Winter Soldier is probably the best example of this, where, you know, you had the Flag Smashers and they seemed like they could have been compelling characters, but they just didn't have the time to really set up their motivations, and because of that, they just felt very one note, very throwaway. I think that they are really good examples of that. Or I could even use characters in, say, like Moon Knight or She-Hulk. I mean, there's countless examples I can really give you, but the point is, a lot of the time, these secondary characters, they just don't really feel that crucial. They just feel like they're here because they need to be. And what I like about all the characters in the show so far, specifically when it comes to the other witches, is that they all do have a legitimate reason for being here. Whether it's Lilia, who's this like divination witch, and she's kind of trying to, you know, be respected again and things like that, and wants to kind of, you know, find her children. I think that's a really interesting storyline. Whether it's Alice, who, you know, is this police officer of sorts, but also has recently lost her mother, and you can kind of see that she is struggling with that. I think that's a really interesting idea. Whether you have the character of Jen, who is this apothecary of sorts, but also has has some really shady business practices, and she's kind of trying to, redeem her reputation. Each one of these witches has a reason for being here, and I think that is just really great to see. I like that they actually are putting a lot of time and effort into it. In episode 3, there's some really good moments, specifically with Alice's character. I think they do some really good stuff with her in episode 3, and so I really do like the way the show is taking the time to get these, to get us to latch on to the motivations of these characters and get us to understand, what their motivation is here. They're not just here because they have to be. They actually do have their own reasonings, and I like the way the show is going about that. I think it would have been very easy to just be like, here's Patti LuPone, here's Shashir Samada, here's Ali On, but no, they're actually giving them a reason for being here, and I really do like that. But then also the idea that Rio has to be there, and because of the tension between her and Agatha, she's trying to do everything she can to avoid it. I think all of that is very intriguing. And then, like I said, with the structure of the show, I just really like the way that they are, getting us to, that they really are taking advantage of the episodic format of this show, where it seems like each episode is going to be some kind of trial within the Witch's Road. This one obviously involved potions and them trying to do what they can to figure out this code, as well as like creating this antidote of sorts. I think again they're doing a good job of making each episode feel distinctive on its own. Episode 1 being, like I said, that sort of parody of True Detective. I think that was really good. And then episode 2 is more so like a let's get the band back together type episode, and then episode 3 is now, okay, let's face our first trial and kind of see how we are able to see what we're really getting ourselves into, and just see how treacherous of a mission this is going to be. I think the show is doing a really good job with that. So those are all the things I'm honestly really impressed by with the show so far. Let's get into some of my more negative elements here, because again, this show definitely is not perfect, and there are some things I'm a little bit concerned about. When it comes to Agatha, for example, as a character, I love Kathryn Hahn. I love the work that she's really giving to this role so far. I love how much effort she's putting in here. But as a character right now, she just doesn't really have that strong of an arc, and I feel like it's because, at least right now, there's just not a lot that we know about her. Obviously, we know about her mother, and that her mother, ended up committing suicide and things like that, and that she ended up also sacrificing her kid. But other than that, and the tension between her and Rio, which I think is really intriguing, there's not really a lot going on with her as a character individually that I'm all that latched onto. Now, the idea that the teen might potentially be her son, that opens the door for a little bit more development. That gets me a little bit more excited to see, okay, what are we really doing with this character? I think when you have a spin-off show, you need to take full advantage of the fact that, this is our main character. And right now, while yes, she does feel like our main character, I don't feel like she's developed all that much from WandaVision to Agatha All Along. And yes, it's only been 3 episodes, but right now, I just don't feel like her arc has been all that strong. It really just feels like I'm trying to find my powers. I'm selfishly throwing myself into this situation. If I have to lose these witches, I lose these witches. I don't really care. It just doesn't really feel like there's much more to latch onto. And so I'm hoping, once we find out more about what's going on between her and Rio, as well as why things are happening with the teen, why this spell was placed upon him, I think that could maybe open the door for just a little bit more development with her character. Because right now, while I like what we're getting with her, there's just not a lot to really latch onto there. And this also is the case when it comes to the other witches. As much as I like their backstories right now, I just feel like a lot of it does feel just a little bit rushed to me. Episode 2 in particular, it's like, okay, we're going to Lilia. All right, now let's go to Jen. Now let's go to Jen. Now let's go to Alice. And it just feels a little rushed in that way. And I hope that we're able to just spend a little bit more time latching onto these characters, diving deeper into their backstories. They do hint at that a little bit more in episode 3, and I like what we're overall getting there. But again, it doesn't really change the fact that right now, I just feel at a bit of a distance when it comes to some of their backstories. I do feel like we have a good idea, but I needed to go a little bit further. And this is something a lot of Disney Plus shows have a problem with. They have a really good setup, but they don't really develop it any further. And I really hope the show is able to do that, because right now, like, I see the intrigue, I see the potential, I see what they're trying to do, and I think that, you know, if they're able to lean into that, I think that could make for one of some of the best characters we've seen in any of these shows, and really help them kind of stand out from the majority of the supporting players we get in most MCU Disney Plus shows. So I hope that is the case when it comes to these characters, but we'll really just have to see. The teen right now and Rio are really the only characters that I feel are like really well developed and really intriguing. Rio's only been in the show for one episode, and I feel more attached to her than I do to these other characters. I still like these other characters, but again, I just need to know a little bit more about them. Lilia in particular, I want to know more about, and I just feel like we're kind of at a distance with that character, so we'll really just have to see. But easily my biggest issue right now is just the inclusion of Sharon Hart as a character. Look, I love Deborah Jo Rupp. I think that she is a hysterical comedian. I think that she always is just such a delight in everything that she's in. I was very excited to see what they were going to do with her in this show, but I gotta say, right now, I just don't really understand why she needed to be here. I get it that she's kind of here as a way for Agatha to kind of have to avoid pulling in Rio. She has a lot of animosity with her, and she doesn't really want to have to confront it, and so her way to do that is to pull her in. The whole setup of this was so clumsily handled, where it's like, oh, well, we need a green witch. All right, let me go to Sharon, but I'm going to tell her that my name is Agnes still, and that I'm hosting this party, and I'd like for her to be a part of it. And then we just cut to Sharon there, and then immediately after Agnes has told her that this is what she's doing, she just immediately drops the facade, and she's acting like Agatha, and they're conjuring up this spell, and they're saying this whole chant of sorts in an effort to, you know, get into the witch's road. Meanwhile, Sharon is basically none the wiser. There's like one moment where she's like, oh, we need to call the authorities that we've been kidnapped, but aside from that, it just never really felt like she was sort of like on the fence about what was going on, or just a little bit, you know, sort of worried about the, you know, the state that she was in. She wasn't really asking the right questions about, oh, isn't this still supposed to be a party? So again, I don't really buy it. I don't really like the way they went about this character. I think she does have some really funny moments in episode 3. I love that she keeps correcting everyone and saying, no, my name is just Sharon. This is who I am. I like how, you know, she's along for the ride, and, you know, when they're drinking this potion, she just wants wine, and she enjoys the wine, and she is enjoying the kitchen set. I think all of that is really funny. But right now, at least to me, I feel like they kind of wasted her character. You know, her dying in episode 3 especially, yes, it's a really shocking moment. Yes, it's not something that I expected, but it really just shows me that right now, I just found this to be such a disposable character, and I just don't feel like they did much of anything other than, well, Deborah Jo Rupp's really funny, and we really liked her work in WandaVision, so let's just get her on the show. Just the explanation, it's just so lazily handled. The idea that she is just so okay with all of this happening, never is questioning anything about it, not questioning why Agatha's acting differently all of a sudden, or why they're actually going through all these trials. I just don't buy into any of it. It really just feels like they needed a reason for her to be here, and they kind of shoehorned her into this, and it just feels really forced to me. So yes, I enjoyed the banter between her and all the other characters. I thought there was a lot of fun there, but if I really have to judge it based off of like a substance perspective, I just don't feel like they did enough with this character. I don't feel like there was a reason for her to really be here, other than, again, they just didn't want to, you know, Agatha just didn't want Rio to be a part of this. And especially if Rio's going to be there in the next episode, then it's really going to show me just how unnecessary it was to have Sharon even in here when she's not even going to play much of a role. You could have had her be somebody where it's like, oh, we need to make sure that she's none the wiser to what's going on. We have to keep up this facade. We have to try to keep her in the dark. We have to kind of try to trick her into what's happening. You could have a scene with her and all the other witches where she's kind of discussing the plan, but no, nothing like that. Immediately, we just cut from her telling Sharon that they're having this party to Sharon just being at the party and not really seeming all that concerned, other than she's just not sure if she's supposed to know the song, and she seems a little bit adverse to some of the traditions and things like that, but it never really seems like she thinks that she's in any real sense of danger, and I just didn't really buy into it. So I just wasn't really a big fan of what they did with that character, and it really is the only thing in the show so far where I feel like this just didn't really need to happen. This just feels unnecessary. She's only here because they need to drag out this conflict of Agatha and Rio, and the two of them having this distrust between each other and eventually then having to come back around. Like, it just didn't feel that satisfying to me, and I feel like this is the one thing that the show just isn't doing a great job with so far. But other than that, I mean, I'm really liking the show. I like a lot of the setup. I think there's some really great intrigue here. I think there's a lot of characters that I definitely do feel like I'm latching onto. The style and feel of it is very distinctive. It has this very, like, comedic, but also this very horror. It has this very, like, comedic style, you know, really does lean into the comedy, but also does have this tinge of horror, does have this sense of sinister, you know, does feel a little bit more sinister than some of the other stuff we have gotten from Marvel so far. It's doing a good job of standing out on its own, not really caring how it fits into the larger universe. And I've said this before, I don't even think that's necessarily a problem. I think if you're able to have just a really good, like, self-contained show that's able to be something really unique and distinctive, then I really don't think there's an issue with that. And I think this show, for the most part, is doing a really good job with that. You got a really fun cast of characters. You have a really exciting mission going on here. They're finding a way to take advantage of the episodic formats. They, you know, are able to maintain a mostly consistent tone throughout. There's definitely some moments that do feel a little bit wonky. There are some things that I think do feel a little bit underwritten so far, but there's enough intrigue presented throughout these first 3 episodes that really just has me really excited. I feel really good about this show 3 episodes in, and I feel like if they're able to keep up the momentum, I do think that this could just end up being one of the better MCU Disney Plus shows that we have seen so far, because I really do think they are on the right track right now. So overall, I was a big fan of these first 3 episodes, so I am going to go ahead and rank all 3 episodes individually. So the first episode of the show, Seekest Thou the Road, I am going to give a B. Episode 2, Circle Sewn with Fates, Unlock Thy Hidden Gates, I am going to give a B+. And episode 3, Through Many Miles of Tricks and Trials, I am also going to give a B+. Alright, so now we are going to review the rest of this season, and holy shit, I mean, look, when I filmed that video initially, I very much did it under the assumption that while things were starting out really great, they could very easily crumble and just completely fall apart, because that's unfortunately kind of been the course when it comes to Disney Plus shows, and not even just Marvel shows. I think Star Wars shows have the same problem, especially. A lot of Disney Plus shows, they know how to start, but they don't really know how to continue on from it. It's like they peak kind of early, and they get to a point where they have so much more story to tell, but they don't really know how to tell it, and it all just kind of, you know, flatlines as a result. I think there's really only a few exceptions I can think of, like a Loki, like an Andor, like, I really like Ms. Marvel personally. I thought that was one of their better ones that they've done. WandaVision, obviously, you know, was a really good show, but there's more than, you know, just a few examples of shows that I thought started off really promising and just really fumbled, you know, dropped the ball towards the end, you know, I was really expecting for this show to be that. However, this show actually pulled off a very rare feat of actually, I think, getting better as it went along. Honestly, I do think that, you know, when you see the start of the show, it's like, okay, I see the potential, I like what they're trying to do, let's see if they can continue it, and I think not only were they able to maintain the consistency of those first 3 episodes, but they actually were able to surpass it and give us what I think is by far one of Disney's most thoughtful and just well-handled projects to date, well-handled projects that they have done in a very long time, and really makes me hopeful moving forward when it comes to Disney Plus shows. Like, if this is what we are going to do moving forward, I think we are actually in really good hands. It does actually seem like they are starting to figure out what they needed to do here, and I'm generally very impressed by the way the rest of this season ended up going, but I guess we'll just go ahead and jump right into it. So, something I think they did very well in the first 3 episodes is really lay the groundwork for what the show is really going to be. You have all these different witches, and they're all going into the witch's road. They all have a goal of their own that they are trying to obtain. You have Alice, who's like trying to, trying to kind of get closure with her dead mother. You have, you have Jen, who is dealing with this business, this like very problematic, business that she's a part of, and she's kind of trying to do what she can to redeem her reputation. You have, you have Lilia, who seems like she's kind of in this state of confusion, and she's kind of trying to find her purpose and things like that. So each of them really, and then of course you have Agatha, who is trying to do what she can to, obtain, to regain her powers and, kind of do whatever she wants from there. But you also know that she has more going on, that's up her sleeve. And then of course there's the teen of it all, who is just kind of there, who, is clearly a huge fan of what's going on, but he also seems to have a larger goal in the story that we haven't really figured out yet. And I think they did a really good job in setting that up, but what I think works even better is that with that groundwork, you really begin to recognize just how great of a job they did as you see how the rest of the show ends up going. When we lay those, when we actually see how the chips, when we actually see these things come into play and we start to reveal the bigger picture behind everything, I think that's really when the show ends up shining, particularly when it comes to Tien, which, I guess I'll just jump right into it. The whole story that they ended up doing for him was not at all what I expected them to do. I thought for sure the direction that they were going to go in with him is one of two things. Either, yes, he was just going to be Agatha's son, and that was going to be it, which Agatha's son does play a major role, as we'll talk about, but it's not Tien. I thought that was particularly well done. They make it kind of seem like it's him, but then in episode 4, she realizes that that's not her son, and I thought that was a pretty interesting reveal. Or it was going to be something very disappointing, and I was kind of expecting the latter, to be honest with you, just because the MCU has had this trend lately where they set up some very intriguing twists, particularly in Disney Plus shows, and you think it's going to go somewhere really exciting, and then we get the Ralph Boner of it all. And look, I'll be the first to say, I don't hate that twist. I actually think it's a really funny idea that you had Quicksilver and he just turns out to be some random actor. I think that's a funny idea, and I think that they could have done something really fun with it. And they, we'll talk about that actually, because that actually ends up playing some relevance into the show. But I really was expecting something like that to happen, where either Tien was going to be someone that was kind of insignificant, or it was going to be that he just turned out to be Agatha's son. Instead, it turns out that this actually is something that is a lot more interesting, and probably one of the more shocking twists that the show has done. Yet it's not even their best twist. We'll get into all of that. But we find out basically by the end of episode 5 that Tien is actually Billy Maximoff. He is now inhabiting a human body who was known as William Kaplan. William Kaplan, of course, we find out was this, guy, was this kid who was he had his bar mitzvah and things like that, and he ended up suffering this very severe car crash that killed him. His parents are not aware that his soul is gone, that his body is still around, but his soul has essentially left his body, and now Billy is in his body. He has kind of forgotten his previous life, and that whole episode, the way that they kind of unravel everything, I thought was brilliant. It did a great job of putting us into the perspective of Billy, someone who kind of, it's like this horror situation, it's like this horrific situation where now he is in this body that he doesn't recognize. There's all these people in his life that are supposed to be close to him, but like he has no relation to. He doesn't know who his parents are. He doesn't recognize, like William's boyfriend and things like that. And at the same time, he also is trying to figure out, like, how did this happen? Where is Tommy? Where's my mom? Like, I thought that was just such a fascinating idea to do with this character, because here's the thing. I knew eventually that Billy and Tommy were probably going to come back in some capacity. They focused on them a lot in WandaVision and obviously Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness. We have heard lots of rumors that we are going to have this Young Avengers type story, which, look, I don't even know if I buy into that at this point, because I don't feel like Marvel even knows what they're doing. This seems like one of the rare times maybe they do. But I did not anticipate that it was going to go down in the way that it did. And like I said, what I love about this episode is how intimate this really is. I mean, this really is in his perspective the entire time. We get a lot of answers as to what really went on when it came to like the sigil and things like that. We find out that this was something that he basically instructed Lilia to do. Lilia put this spell onto him so that way he didn't remember anything and nobody else remembered anything. I thought that was a really interesting idea. And that she basically did it to protect him. I thought that was a really cool reveal. I was expecting for like the Salem 7 to tie into this. Like, they put a spell on Tien in an effort to like kind of like, make everybody forget who he was. Like, he was like a key part of like saving everyone. But no, it turns out this was a lot more deliberate. This was something that Lilia specifically did to protect William, and I thought that was a really interesting idea. And then the fact that you have Ralph Bohner come back and you're actually able to get Evan Peters, and he has probably one of the most unexpectedly funny scenes in the entire show, I thought was great. It was a great way to make use of a character that everybody kind of hated. Again, I never did, but I know a lot of people really did. It's kind of like the Mandarin all over again, where like I actually like that twist and a lot of people just really fucking hate it. I thought it was a great way to get this character back and actually give him some sort of substance and give him a bit more of a purpose. And I like the fact that he is the one to actually jog William's memory and get him to realize that, oh, I actually am Billy Maximoff, and I'm here, with the sole goal now of trying to find Tommy and essentially do that to, and essentially try to do that in an effort to, find Tommy and break Wanda's spell. I think it's just a really cool idea, and it really gets us caught up on this character very fast, but it also gets us much more attached to this character. When you realize that he actually broke Wanda's spell in an effort to now go after Agatha. This was always his goal from the beginning, is that he is now going after her because he wants to try to find Tommy. He has had his own selfish reasons for doing so. It really makes you recontextualize that first episode, because you watch that first episode and you think that it just kind of happened, that because Wanda died, now the spell is broken. But it turns out that Billy's actually the one to save Agatha in that scenario. I thought that was a really cool idea. And, seeing the fact that, and just seeing how all of that went down and understanding the connection that he had now and the way he was able to kind of play Agatha, make her think he was like this huge fan and that he was willing to, go along for the ride when he knew exactly the kind of person that she was. He knew exactly what her goal was, and he was willing to, and he was basically able to play her like a fiddle. It puts these two on equal footing in a really interesting way, because even I was like, okay, but what exactly does Tien have to do here? What is his actual goal? And so I really like the idea that he actually was behind a lot more than we think, and that he was actually pulling some strings in a way that Agatha was not aware of. It really puts these two in a very interesting position and really sets things up very well for the endgame. I love the moment where, in the present day, now that we know everything that's going on, he essentially is telling her what needs to happen. And basically, Agatha decides to like kind of, get them to continue working together. So there's a lot more tension with this dynamic now. It's like, is Agatha actually legitimate with what she wants to do? And how does Billy intend to go about this? Is he now going to try to turn everybody against Agatha and kind of go about this goal and get them to realize what she's doing? Or is he actually willing to join forces with her? I thought was a really interesting interesting idea. I thought it was a great way to, you know, further the conflict and really just move, you know, really progress the story forward in a very interesting way, but also totally makes sense. There's nothing here where I'm watching, I'm like, that does not connect to what happened before. It actually really does make a lot of sense when you think about it. You can absolutely go back, watch those first 5 episodes, and it's like, okay, I actually do see how this fits together, and I thought that was just brilliantly handled the way they ended up doing that. And again, there's so much thought put into this, and that's crazy to think about from the MCU. The MCU has not really done a great job of putting thought into things, but they really did when it comes to this, and I think this is just the perfect example of that. The fact that they actually did take the time to not only get us caught up on what was going on, make us realize that Billy's actually been in William's body for like 3 years, but also the fact that like he has had this goal all, you know, this entire time, and we just weren't aware of it. Also have it perfectly align with his previous actions, again, I think is just a really great example of storytelling, and I was just really happy to see how well they pulled this off. And look, I think the show did do a good job of, you know, kind of planting the seeds that there's something more going on with Teen. But the moment you see those horns come out at the end of episode 5 and you start to realize, like, what this actually might mean, that he might actually be connected to Wanda, he might actually be one of her kids, holy shit. I mean, that is exactly the kind of cliffhanger that you just get so excited over. And that's what I think a lot of these Marvel shows have been lacking. They haven't felt like, you know, actual TV they haven't felt like legitimate TV episodes. They have felt like they are more just like interrupting scenes in a film, or it's like an act break. It didn't really feel like an episode of television, and I think what the show did so well is find a way to make this feel episodic, but also feel like they are telling an overarching story. And it seems like this is something that should be a no-brainer, but this is something that Marvel has struggled with, and it's great to see how this is an area in which they have greatly improved. They really have recognized what they needed to do, and it really does make me hopeful moving forward that they are going to, you know, that they are starting to figure things out, and I think this is a really good example of that. But something else that really did impress me in this show is that we actually do get to spend a lot of the time with the other witches, and I really did feel by the end of this show like I had grown a connection to all of them. Each one of them essentially gets not necessarily their own episode, but they at least get a moment where it seems like, you know, we really get a chance to get to know them, whether this be something as simple as Alice in episode 4, where we find out a lot more about her mother, that she was this singer of sorts, and, you know, there's this whole situation that ends up going down involving where there's this demon of sorts, and she ends up sacrificing herself. I thought that was a really strong moment. I was hoping to get a little bit more with that plot line, but I like the way they did peel back the layers a bit more about their overall relationship. I think they do a good job of diving into, you know, where she really was at, the way that her mother, you know, that whole storyline I thought was really well done. But especially when it comes to Lilia, oh my god, episode 7 of this show is probably one of the most impressive things I have seen in the MCU to date, and one of the best episodes of television, I think, in general, that I've seen this year. I was just so blown away by how well constructed this episode was, because the whole thing really is kind of telling this story through Lilia's perspective and really giving us a much better idea of what her character is truly all about throughout the show. There are so many moments where, like, she's looking off to the side, or it seems like that, you know, she's forgetting a conversation that happened just a couple minutes ago, and you're just really perplexed as to, like, what is going on with this character? Why does she feel so out? Why does she feel like she's constantly out of the loop? Why does it feel like she is just not really involved in what's going on? Like, she's always kind of distracted by something. And this episode just ties that up perfectly, where we find out that essentially Lilia lives her life out of, you know, basically in a non-linear fashion. Everything that happens to her, it doesn't connect. There are conversations she has that she needs to have again because of the fact that the sequences are not in order, and I really love the way that this episode commits to that. There are scenes that we see in this episode, and you're like, it could have very easily confused you. It could have very easily been an instance where it was a hindrance to the episode, where it feels like we are not getting the full story of what's going on, what I think they do so brilliantly is they really show you, like, this is exactly the problem that Lilia struggles with, and this is how she has to try to face it head on. You know, she has this information that she needs to reveal to Jen, but she needs to find the best way to do it. She's also aware of the stakes here. She knows what Agatha's really done. She knows what's actually going to happen. She knows that there is something going on involving Rio, and the way that all of that pieces together, I thought was just really well handled here. And I think it's structured really well too, because the whole episode they're in this very tense situation with these tarot cards where, like, if they don't place it in the proper sequence, all of these swords are gonna fall, and it's gonna kill basically anybody that's in that room. And so Lily is kind of in conflict with herself, but you're also in conflict because you don't actually know if they are pulling this off in the correct sequence. You don't even know what the correct sequence is, but as the episode goes on, you start to realize what's actually, what's really happening. I mean, even cutting back to, Lilia's first lesson in divination and things like that, and you realize that this is something she's gone through her entire life. It just really helps you understand that character, and Patti LuPone is just phenomenal in this episode. I mean, look, I know that Kathryn Hahn has just gotten an Emmy nomination, and I think it definitely is deserving, particularly in the last 2 episodes of the show. She's absolutely brilliant. I mean, the whole show she's brilliant, but those last 2 episodes in particular, she really does kill it. But Patti LuPone absolutely should have gotten a supporting actress nomination, because she just crushes it in this role. You really understand Lilia. I feel like she is by far one of the best characters in the show. She's one of the most well fleshed out characters, and again, just seeing the way that she is, trying to deliver this information in this very urgent information in the most concise way that she can, going against the thing that is constantly plaguing her, was just such a riveting way to tell this story, because you're also on the edge of your seat, not really sure if she's going to be able to deliver this information in time. There are moments where it seems like we're now earlier in the conversation and it's not going to happen, but also you have the Salem 7 who's approaching, and it's this whole tense situation. It really feels like this is like the culmination of everything we've gotten, and the fact that Lily is actually able to save the day here and successfully reveal to Jen what's been going on. Why has everybody been dying? And it's because the literal personification of death has been accompanying them to the Salem 7, and that's who Rio is. And it's like, holy shit. I mean, look, Teen being Billy Maximoff is a really great twist, but Rio being death, I think, is an even better one, because it really gets you to understand what her goal has been this entire time. She has been purposefully, kind of cryptic about the way that she, talks about the way that we have, with the conversations that she's had in this show. It really feels like we've kind of struggled to really know her. We know that her and Agatha have had like a past relationship, but other than that, we didn't really know. So to realize that she actually is death, and not only that, but Agatha has known this entire time that that's who she is, and she's basically been the reason they're in this entire situation, is an incredible moment. And then her sacrificing herself, recognizing that she has to do this in order to kill all of the 7. Oh my god, it was just such a impactful moment. And the way it all ends with the younger Lilia attending her first lesson and things like that, and you realize that she's basically going back to the beginning. Just such a amazing way to tell this story. And it's moments like that that really just got me to recognize, like, wow, this is not only, I think, one of the better MCU projects we've gotten, this is a legitimately great show, and this is a perfect example of that. This is something that, on its own, I think, like, yes, I don't think this is an episode, like, you can watch the rest of the show and you'll understand this episode, but it's one you really do appreciate on its own, and that's not something you can say often with these MCU Disney Plus shows. A lot of them just kind of run into the other. And this episode really shows you that, like, they really have taken their time to try to focusing on each episode on its own. And while they're telling this larger story, they really are trying to do something different. They're trying to do some really experimental and different ideas. And I thought that this was just one of the most impressive I have seen to date. Everything about this episode, the praise that it's gotten, has absolutely been deserved. But again, it's the way they're able to tell this story, not only to get you to understand what Lilia constantly deals with, but also, by literally putting in her perspective, but also still finding a way to progress the story forward. That's what really impressed me about about this. This was not an episode where we slowed down the momentum. Neither of these episodes, in fact, slowed down the momentum. They still found a way to advance the story forward, but just give us a more intimate look at both of these characters and what they are really struggling with and what overall has been their goal this entire time. And I think for Lilia, her goal has always been, she knew that her time was coming. She knew for a long time that death was coming after her, and she willingly went on the Witch's Road in an effort to be the one to save everybody. That's always been her goal this entire time. She has talked about the fact that, like, you know, the Witch's Road is not going to end well. There were moments in, you know, the beginning, in the first few episodes where, like, she was freaking out and it was kind of played for laughs, but looking back, you understand now what was really going on. She was getting these warnings from death that her time was coming up, and she knew how sensitive of a mission this really was, how this needed to be done as soon as possible, and the fact that she was able to actually get it done and ends this show as a legitimate hero, stopping the Salem 7 and actually accomplishing something within her life and making sure that this, you know, that this affliction that she's dealt with her entire life doesn't end up, you know, besting her, was just so amazing to watch and just such a satisfying way to tell that story. So, yeah, I mean, I really just can't praise that episode enough. It probably is the best episode of this entire show, but again, just an overarching, again, really just wanted to have a individual section to talk about that episode, but also have this overarching feel of they really have just done a great job of fleshing out these characters to their fullest potential, and really not just Agatha and Teen. They could have easily just focused on those two characters and everybody else could have felt underdeveloped, but they found a way to give everyone just enough that we really did find ourselves caring about each and every character by the end of the show, and I think Lilia's episode is probably the best example I can give of that. But then what I love is even after all of that, it seems like we finally have the show figured out. You know, we have this whole episode where we now know that Death is basically the villain of all of this, and that Death basically, you know, gives Billy or Agatha, you know, the this ultimatum where it's like, I will not leave until I take one of you need to be sacrificed. And you have this dilemma of, like, is Agatha going to continue to just be, you know, evil and selfish and just let Billy die, or is she actually going to, you know, take one for the team, essentially? And she does, and you have this great moment where it seems like the two of them have kind of reconciled things, and it seems like, you know, she is now decided to, you know, even though she has her powers back, she has decided to sacrifice herself. It's this really brilliant moment, but then you get to the end of the episode and you have this and Billy has this realization where he realizes, oh my god, wait, all around my room are different things that were part of the road, and it makes you think that maybe Billy is the one that essentially was behind the road. He was the one who created it. But then you get to that last episode, and really, that last episode just gives me such a deeper appreciation for this entire series. If episode 7 was the episode that made me realize, holy shit, like, if episode 6 was the one that made me realize how great of a show this was, and then episode 7 really showed me what they were fully capable of, episode 9 is really the one that puts everything into perspective, because what we don't realize until this last episode is that this whole series pretty much is kind of showing us a different side of Agatha and really getting us to unpack who she really is and subtly showcase, you know, her story. And we don't realize until this last episode that this really is a story about, you know, really understanding just how powerful she is, but also recognizing that, because what this episode does so incredibly well is we've already laid the foundation for Agatha at this point, but the show, my issue with it up to this point was that they were hinting at things with Agatha, but they were never really fully diving into them. You know, we heard about her son who died, and we thought maybe it was Billy, and then it turned out to not be Billy. We knew that she had this relationship with Rio, and Rio turns out to be Death, and, you know, that whole thing is very complicated. We know that Agatha has kind of been, you know, willingly, you know, Agatha has, essentially been in this for herself, and there's been this, like, battle between her and Billy, essentially, but we didn't really know. It always felt like the show was kind of keeping us at an arm's length when it came to her origins and when it came to what her initial goal really has been. And in this episode, we finally get that. And I've heard some say that, like, they feel like this episode wasn't the most necessary. And I would argue it's the most necessary episode of the entire series, because it really recontextualizes how we feel about Agatha as a character overall, because what they do so well is get you to understand what the Witch's Road is really all about. The Witch's Road, you think throughout this entire show, is this very dangerous trial of sorts that all these witches are going on in an attempt to regain their powers, in an attempt to, basically feel relevant, feel powerful again, in an attempt to, upgrade themselves and turn their lives around. But what you don't realize until this episode is that none of that actually mattered. What the Witch's Road actually is something that Agatha specifically has created. And the way it started off as essentially just this, like, very sweet sort of song that her and her son Nicholas came up with as a way to kind of bond, and it slowly transformed into something much more darker as a way for Agatha to, like, drain the life out of everybody and gain their powers, essentially, is such a brilliant idea. And also the idea that, like, she was always thinking of doing this, but Nicholas was kind of the one holding her back from it. He was always the person that was keeping her from going full evil, from really unleashing her darkness, and him dying was kind of the catalyst for her becoming the way that she was. I mean, this is really, I think, the episode that secures Kathryn Hahn that Emmy. I mean, she is just absolutely phenomenal here, showing a completely different side to Agatha that we haven't seen before, getting you to both sympathize but also really understand just how evil of a person that she is and why she decided to do this. Going as far as to seeing this whole montage of her throughout history basically murdering witches and realizing that the whole road was basically just a ruse. There never was a road. This was something that was created by Agatha to lure people into giving her their powers and the sun and everything. I mean, just such brilliant storytelling. But it makes a lot of sense, because if you remember back in episode 2, when they are performing the ritual, the road doesn't happen at first. It's not until Billy comes in that something actually ends up triggering it, and we find out that because of Billy's powers, that is actually what caused the road to become a reality. And there's this great moment where, it seems like Billy is responsible for it, but then Agatha shows up as this ghost of sorts. And I'm actually all for this. I like the idea that Agatha is now back as this ghost, essentially, and she is going to try to sort of become this mentor to Billy and kind of get him to not go down the same path that she did. She kind of lets him know that, like, she was always going to kill them. Her goal was always to get her powers back, and anybody that stood in her way, she was going to make sure they die. And but there was one person, but what I like about this is that even throughout all of that, there was one person that Billy actually was able to save, and that turns out to be Jen. And I think that's a great idea. I love the moment where we see that Jen actually got out alive because she was able to save Billy. She was the one that kind of convinced Billy and Agatha to, like, set things aside and things like that. I mean, I really just love that moment. And with it now ending with basically Billy deciding to allow Agatha to be this, mentor of sorts, and that they're now going to go back to the road to try to find Tommy, I think is a perfect way to end this series. Because yes, it does kind of end on this cliffhanger, but it doesn't feel unsatisfying. It does feel like this is a completed story. There just is another direction that we could go in. And I do feel like with the success of the show, we absolutely are going to see that. We're going to see these two go to find Tommy, but also dive deeper into the relationship between these two characters and really show how I think Billy is going to turn Agatha into a better person and get Agatha to kind of reevaluate her life a bit. I thought that this was just such an incredible episode. It gets you to fully understand her motivations, but also gets you to see how Agatha comes to reconcile with that, how her sacrificing herself is really, I think, her first step in trying to become a better person, in recognizing, what she has done done and now try and not necessarily shedding that part of herself. She's always going to have that part of herself. And that's something I like about this show. They never tried to fully redeem her in a way where she's not evil anymore. She's always going to have those, evil, maniacal. She's always going to have those like maniacal tendencies, but she is prepared to make sure that Billy is the first person that isn't going to best her. She's going to make sure that Billy does actually complete this goal. But also the question is that what she's doing, or does she have another goal in mind? I think the show does end on a really great note here. It ends in this open ending where you can interpret this as Agatha actually being willing to, go forward with Billy and be this mentor to him and, actually get him to find Tommy, or is she leading him down a darker path? I think there's a lot of directions you can take this, and I think, again, it's just a great example of knowing the story you wanted to tell. There is no point in this show where I feel like we've gone off the rails, or that this is not what was supposed to happen, or that it feels like something was missing. No, it really does feel like what you can watch back this show, and you can see the building blocks from the beginning. You can see exactly why things turned out the way they did. Why did the road not come to life at first? Because it wasn't real until Billy showed up. Why did, all these other characters die, so abruptly like that? Because Agatha was always intending for them to do so. Why did Billy and Agatha have this, why was he the one to outmaneuver Agatha? Because his powers is what made the road a reality. There are just so many ways to look at this show, and I think it's just, there are just so many great reveals here that just really puts everything together, and it's just something that was just so impressive the way they were able to do that here, especially compared to other shows of its ilk. But yeah, overall, I just really enjoyed so much about this show. I think, from a directing perspective, what I really appreciate about Jac Schaeffer is not just the fact that the show has appointed a showrunner, and that it seems like she really did have a vision throughout this, but she actually does play around with the tone of the show. The show starts off, and it does have this, very comedic and sort of campy feel to it, but as the show goes on, it gets a little bit more serious. It gets a little bit more, it gets a little darker. It gets a little bit more complex, and I thought but that's still maintaining that fun tone throughout. The show is still fun all the way through. There's a lot of, moments here that definitely had me laughing, but there are just as many moments that felt very introspective, and I thought there was something that was just really well done. It's a show that really did put these characters first, and I thought that was something that was really great, but also very refreshing. The other thing you haven't noticed me talk about in the show is that there really isn't any action here. The show does dive into things like horror. There's an episode that's basically a full-on possession type episode, which I thought was a really interesting idea, but it never really dives into what you expect a Marvel show to do. This show really is squarely focused on this quest that these characters are going on, but also getting you to dive deeper into who they really are and what their motivations are throughout their journey, and I really enjoyed getting to see that. I have always said, I think the Marvel Disney Plus shows should be an opportunity to take these characters that are maybe a bit more thinly sketched and really peel back the layers of them. And that is something that Agatha All Along just really understood how to do. I feel like the only other show that's known how to do that is Loki. And it seems like Agatha All Along is the other show that really understood that pretty much throughout. And that's something I was very impressed by. And I think Schaeffer really, I think, is one of the people that just really needs to be appointed as to someone who is, maybe spearheading the MCU moving forward. Get her in there, get, Benson and Moorhead in there. These are the people that really seem to have forward visions. They know what to do to make this franchise continue in a way to keep it fresh and keep it exciting and to not make it feel so derivative. They're not just recycling ideas like fucking Avengers Doomsday or whatever the hell that's going to be, where we're bringing back characters that we had an amazing send-off in Endgame and are clearly now bringing them back because we are just so desperate. We have no idea what to actually do, so we're just going back to the drawing board. No, you actually have some people who have some fresh ideas, who have some, really interesting ways of furthering the MCU, and I feel like those are the visions that need to be utilized. These are the people that really need to be appointed into higher positions because they know exactly what they are doing, and this is just just such a perfect example of that. And not to turn this into a full-on MCU rant, but like, this is just such a refreshing show all around. Like, the fact that, again, this show doesn't go balls to the wall in the way you expect it to in the last 2 episodes is super refreshing to watch. I mean, how many of these shows have started off pretty grounded and then get way more just what we expect from the MCU? Looking at WandaVision, for example, and I like the WandaVision finale. A lot of people don't. I enjoy the WandaVision finale. I think it's a satisfying finale to that show, but I think we can all agree the show had this very different feel to it and then did kind of turn into more of what we expect from the MCU. You know, you can also say that about like Falcon and the Winter Soldier. You can certainly say that about Secret Invasion, although I don't like that show at all, and that pretty much the entire way through was like that. Hawkeye even, I mean, I really enjoy Hawkeye. The finale is not the greatest at points, but I think that Hawkeye is definitely a really, really good show. But most of these, Miss Marvel is another example. Like, I enjoy that finale, but definitely feels more generic MCU. Moon Knight is probably the best example I can give, where like that show has this very specific feel to it and then feels like it just reverts into something a lot more generic. Agatha All Along never really did that, and I think really the big reason is because you have somebody the entire way through that is making the key that is, you know, making all the key decisions. She is the one that has the final say. It doesn't feel like there is this, you know, overlord at Marvel that is basically saying what needs to happen. It really does feel like they actually just let Jack Schaefer cook, and as a result, the show is just a lot better. I think also, again, just, I gotta praise the practical effects here, particularly, you know, as the show goes on. I think the different time periods, the different costume designs, I thought were just really creative here. The episode with Lilia in particular, I thought they did some really cool stuff with that. I just thought overall they really took advantage of what they could do in terms of the you know, look and feel of the road and the way all of that is constructed. They really just took full advantage of that, and that's something that I just really appreciate. I think the score as well is just really fantastic here. Just everything about this show I really do find myself very impressed by. I think really my only issues when it really comes down to the grand scheme of things is that there are a couple elements that I wanted more from. The Salem 7, by the end, it feels like a non-entity. They really just don't feel like that big of a deal. Yes, you have that great episode where Lilia defeats them, but I just wanted a bit more when it came to the Salem 7. I really felt like as a threat, they just, by the end, feel a bit, they just feel a little bit, unnecessary. They don't really feel like this big presence. They had that great moment in episode 2, but like aside from that, I just never really felt the presence of them, and I think that's the one thing that does hurt this show. Also, as much as I did enjoy the character of Jen, I wish we got to dive a little bit deeper into what she was really facing. All the backlash that she was dealing with like her, you know, products and things like that. We never really focused that much on that aside from that one episode, and I wish there was something that they did dive a little bit deeper into. But again, the things that this show did well, it really did do well, and it really is hard to find too many complaints here. I think there are just some real, I think this is a show that, again, from the beginning, you just really can look at as this is one of the most successful MCU projects in a very long time. It feels so much more refreshing. It feels like they had a much better idea of what they wanted to do, and they really did stick to it, but also found a way to take the show in some really exciting directions that I didn't even know that they were really going to do, and I think it just made the show that much better overall. You had some fantastic performances here. Catherine Hahn, Patti LuPone, Joe Locke, I think, is very overlooked in the show, but specifically like when he becomes Billy and we start to realize more about him, I think he really just killed it in the show, and I was very impressed by his performance. Aubrey Plaza, of course, was fantastic. I think Death as a character, there's so much more they can do with her. I think that's another character that like I just want to see more of. I hope we get to see more of her in the MCU moving forward, because I think that they've opened a lot of doors for what they can do. I just really hope that whatever they do involving these characters, Jack Schaefer's a part of it, because I think she really is the reason why this show turned out to be as good as it was. Again, kind of crazy how you appoint a showrunner and pretty much almost everything is kind of fixed. It's certainly not a perfect show. Like I said, there are definitely some things that I did have issues with. The Mrs. Hart thing, okay, I kind of get what they were doing there. I think the idea that, like, she was so insignificant to Agatha, she couldn't even remember her name, I think that's a really funny idea. But I do still kind of feel like that character was a bit unnecessary. I don't really think we need her. I think you could have kind of just had Rio in there from the beginning, but I understand they wanted to have that conflict there, so, you know, I think they do what they need to do. I enjoyed Deborah Jo Rupp when she was on this show, but that's still something that I do have just a little bit of an issue with. Other than that, though, I just really enjoyed this show a lot. I really enjoyed what we got from this. I really thought that, in general, like, this show just ended up being a lot more than I expected. I expected going into the show that this was just going to feel like kind of a lesser version of WandaVision, but it really did do a good job of, after the first couple episodes, divorcing itself from that show, still feeling like a continuation, but having its own feel, having its own vibe to it, you know, giving us a lot of different elements to latch onto, furthering these characters in a really interesting way that you just didn't really expect, and telling this much more cohesive story that ended in a way that just really ended up impressing me. So yeah, overall, I was very surprised by just how good this really was. I was hoping to enjoy it. I went into it excited because I enjoyed the Agatha character, but I feel like they just did so much more with it than I ever really could have expected. And I think by far, this is absolutely one of the better MCU projects we've gotten in quite a bit. So I am absolutely going to give Agatha All Along overall an A-. And that's really it. I know that this show has been done for a while now, but like I said, I reviewed the first 3 episodes, and I just felt like it just kind of made sense to continue. I could have easily just done like a season 1 review, but I didn't want to leave the rest of that video just on the cutting room floor because I enjoyed what I got to do. Yeah, that's really it for my review of this show. Let me know what you guys thought overall. Like I said, was very pleasantly surprised by how much I really did enjoy this, and also just the different directions they went in. I just thought was really well handled. But other than that, that's really it for this video. Also, would love to hear, like, what are your, like, MCU Disney Plus rankings? Because for me, this is probably number 2. I mean, Loki's always, like, the undisputed champion for me. Like, that's always the one that I would say is the best one. Not just because they had a through line, like, the entire way through, but also the entire course of the show. Like, they had an idea of what they wanted to do, and they really just had this great through line, and ended on just such an amazing finale that's one of the best send-offs to any MCU character that I've seen. Please do not fuck that up, by the way. I really hope that in Marvel, that in the MCU's infinite wisdom, that they decide to just leave that alone, because I love the direction they went with that. I would probably say after that, I'm unsure if I would say this or WandaVision is number 2. I think this had a slightly I think WandaVision had a slightly better ending, but I still think that this was really damn good. This is definitely in, like, the top 5 for sure. I would really have to think about it. I just know that, like, this is for sure one of the better ones we've gotten, and that's something that I'm very happy about. But I do have to say, I'm a little bit worried heading into 2025 when it comes to Marvel, because it seems like this year they did a really good job of just focusing on these couple projects and not really trying to bombard us or, like, oversaturate the market in any way, because that's really been the issue, is that there's just been too much MCU. So I think they've had, like, the right idea this year of, like, okay, we're just going to do these 3 or 4 projects. So we have Echo very early on in the year, then we take a big gap, and then we do Deadpool and Wolverine, then we take a little bit more of a smaller gap, then we have Agatha All Along, and then we end the year with What If. I feel like that was the right way to go about it. And then we're heading into 2025, and they have, like, 4 movies, and they have, like, 8 shows coming out, so I'm just a little bit concerned how that's gonna go. Now, some of that does look really good. Like, I'm really excited for Fantastic Four. I think Daredevil's gonna be fantastic. I'm hoping that the new Captain America is really good. I've enjoyed all the footage, all, like, the marketing and trailers, all the trailers we've gotten and stuff like that, so I'm hopeful for that one. I think Thunderbolts looks like a lot of fun, but again, that's how I felt about a lot of MCU stuff, and I feel like they have very much fallen victim to this idea of they need to be this, like, constantly moving machine that just, like, each project just feels like the next project that they need to do, and they don't really focus on each one individually. I think that's what worked about this show, and so I just worry that they're gonna take the wrong lessons from this, but we'll really just have to see how that ends up going overall. I just don't really know, but again, if they can have the vision, if they can have the level of storytelling that this did, I do really feel like we're in good hands moving forward, but again, hesitant to say that with some of the directions they're making. I just really hope they take the right lessons from this, but but we'll have to see. Disney is not exactly one to learn from their mistakes these days. They kind of seem to have the right idea and then end up making the wrong decision, but we'll have to see if they do the same thing with this. My money is that they're going to, but we will really just have to see. But that's really it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you do enjoy this review, I have a ton of other reviews of different MCU shows, as well as a bunch of other movie and TV reviews, so if any of that interests you, definitely consider checking those out, and also consider subscribing to my channel. Would love to have you be a part of all of that. But that's really it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you guys later. Okay, bye.
It's too late to fix anything now that everything has gone wrong.